My name is Harperlyn. I'm 24 years old. And this morning, I stood on the frozen steps of the house that once felt like mine. The Christmas lights still blinked along the porch, cheerful and fake. Inside, I could hear the kind of warmth I hadn't felt in months. Because they kicked me out. Because they said I didn't belong. As I pressed the doorbell, the door opened, and every smile at that table vanished. No one moved. No one spoke. But then I saw it, Lorraine's face. Not anger. Not surprise. Fear. That's when I knew they were hiding something far bigger than the night they threw me out. What do you think they were hiding? And why did I choose to return on a Christmas day? Drop your guesses in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you love seeing underdogs finally take their power back. I used to think home meant safety, a place where no matter how ugly life outside got, you could come back, sit at the kitchen table, and at least feel wanted. But after Lorraine came into our lives, home turned into something else. It was like living on stage where every mistake, every flaw, every weakness I had was spotlighted for her amusement. Back then, I worked 2 jobs just to keep myself moving forward. During the week, I was a cashier at a grocery store on Coleraine Avenue. Nights and weekends, I picked up shifts as a server at a sports bar near the University of Cincinnati. I told myself it was temporary, that all the late nights, sore feet, and ramen dinners would pay off once I finished my nursing classes. But in my father's eyes, none of that seemed to matter anymore. Not after Lorraine showed up. She was the kind of woman who made every room freeze the second she walked in. Not because she was beautiful, though she knew how to make people think she was, but because she was calculating. The perfect blonde hair, the expensive perfume that lingered too long, the way she smiled just enough to seem warm, but not enough to be trusted. I still remember the first night Dad introduced her. He called her the woman who makes me feel alive again. What he didn't say was that she'd soon be the woman who made his daughter invisible. Brent came with her, like excess baggage that no one dared to check. 26 years old, living in the basement, addicted to video games and energy drinks. He called it streaming. I called it mooching. And then there was Janelle, Lorraine's daughter. 22, all glossy hair, manicured nails, and the fake sweetness of someone who could stab you in the back while complimenting your shoes. They weren't just guests in the house. They took it over. Piece by piece, space by space, until the only corner that felt like mine was the small bedroom upstairs where I kept my textbooks and secondhand clothes. Dad somehow didn't see it. Or maybe he didn't want to. He was tired, worn down from years at the steel plant. Lorraine became his voice, his shield, his excuse. If I argued, he stayed silent. If I cried, he turned up the TV. Slowly, the bond one once had with him, the one where he used to bring me hot chocolate during late-night study sessions or sit in the bleachers at my softball games, eroded into a cold nod at dinner, if he even looked at me at all. By the time Thanksgiving came around, I thought I'd gotten used to it. I thought I could handle the constant digs about how I should smile more, or how working 2 jobs just means you made poor choices. But that Thanksgiving wasn't about small jabs. That was the night Lorraine decided to humiliate me in front of every relative I had left. The house smelled of turkey and cinnamon candles, and the dining table was crowded with cousins, uncles, and even my great Aunt Rose, who hadn't left her nursing home in months. Everyone was laughing, passing mashed potatoes, clinking glasses. For a second, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, belonging. I let myself breathe. I let myself believe maybe, just maybe it would be okay. Then Lorraine tapped her fork against her glass. The room went quiet, waiting, because that's how it always was when she wanted attention. She smiled that practiced smile, glanced at Dad like she was doing something noble, and then she said the words that froze me in my chair. We have wonderful news to share. Brent will be taking over the family cabin up in Michigan. George and I have decided it's time to pass it down. The family cabin, my grandmother's cabin, the place she had promised me since I was 12, the place where she used to braid my hair on the porch swing and whisper, "One day this will be yours." The only thing I thought no one could take from me. Forks clinked against plates. My cousins cheered for Brent, who smirked like he'd won a prize he hadn't earned. My chest tightened so hard I couldn't breathe. I looked at my dad, waiting for him to correct her, to stand up, to remind everyone of Grandma's promise. But he didn't. He just sat there, staring at his plate, letting Lorraine's words hang in the air like gospel. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. The cabin was supposed to. Lorraine cut me off with a laugh sharp enough to slice through bone. "Oh, Harper, don't be dramatic. You know how much responsibility it takes to maintain property. Brent is more capable." She stretched the word out like it was an inside joke. The relatives chuckled politely, not daring to go against her. My cheeks burned. I could feel every eye on me, judging, pitying, dismissing. I excused myself from the table before the tears fell. My legs carried me upstairs to the old guest room, where I locked the door and pressed my back against it, trying to catch my breath. That cabin was mine. It was supposed to be my one safe place, my anchor in a family that no longer felt like family. And just like that, it was ripped away. I thought I was alone, but then I heard it. Voices drifting up through the vent. Lorraine's low and smooth. Brent's cocky and careless. "She won't see a dime," Lorraine whispered. Brent laughed. "Good. She doesn't deserve it." My stomach dropped. I covered my mouth to keep from gasping. They weren't just taking the cabin. They were planning to take everything. And in that moment, with the laughter of my family echoing downstairs and the cruel whispers floating through the vent, I realized I wasn't just unwanted. I was being erased. I should have known the night was going to end badly. The house had been tense all day, like everyone was waiting for something to explode. Lorraine had been pacing the kitchen, slamming cabinet doors a little too hard, muttering under her breath about ungrateful girls who don't respect rules. Janelle was upstairs, fake crying into her phone loud enough for me to hear through the vent, making sure I caught every word. "I can't live in this house if she's still here." And Dad just sat in his recliner with the TV volume up, staring blankly like if he ignored us long enough, maybe the chaos would disappear on its own. It was just past midnight when it finally happened. I was lying in bed, still dressed in my work uniform because I was too tired to change. My feet ached from a double shift, and my body felt like it had been wrung out. I was drifting when the pounding started. Heavy fists against my door. My heart jumped. I thought maybe something was wrong. Maybe Dad was sick or the house had caught fire. But then I heard Lorraine's voice, sharp and cruel. "Open the door, Harper. Now." My stomach knotted instantly. Nothing good ever followed those words. I opened the door, and there she stood with her robe tied tight, hair perfectly in place like she'd been waiting for this moment. Janelle hovered behind her, clutching a glittery purse to her chest like it was evidence in a trial. "She stole from me," Janelle said, voice trembling but eyes glinting with triumph. "My necklace, the one Mom gave me. It's gone." I blinked, confused. "What?" "I didn't take anything." Lorraine's lip curled into a sneer. "Don't lie. Janelle doesn't lose things. If she says it's missing, then it's missing. And you're the only one desperate enough to steal." Her words sliced through me. Desperate. That's how she saw me. How she wanted everyone to see me. A broke girl clinging to scraps, willing to steal from the golden daughter. "I swear I didn't." She didn't let me finish. She pushed past me into my room, Janelle following close behind, both of them scanning my shelves and drawers like detectives in a cheap drama. Lorraine yanked open my dresser, tossing clothes onto the floor. Janelle lifted the lid of my shoebox where I kept tip money, gasping dramatically as if she expected the necklace to glitter inside. It wasn't there. Of course it wasn't there. But the fact that they didn't find it didn't matter. Lorraine spun toward me, eyes flashing. "You've crossed the line, Harper. You will not spend another night under this roof." My throat went dry. "You can't be serious. You know I didn't steal anything." She smirked. "Pack your things." I looked over her shoulder at Janelle, who was biting her lip to keep from smiling. That was when I realized this wasn't about a necklace. This was about power, about pushing me out for good. I turned to my dad. He had wandered upstairs during the chaos, standing in the doorway with his arms folded. He didn't look angry. He didn't look sad. He just looked tired. "Dad," I begged, "you know I wouldn't do this. Please tell her." He avoided my eyes. "Maybe it's best if you leave for a while, to cool things down." The air left my body in one crushing wave. He wasn't defending me. He wasn't even questioning them. He was choosing silence, the same silence that had become his shield ever since Lorraine walked into our lives. Lorraine stepped closer, lowering her voice like she was being merciful. "You have 1 hour. Trash bags will do. We don't need a thief touching the luggage." She shoved a box of black garbage bags into my arms and turned on her heel. Janelle giggled softly as they left, their footsteps fading down the hall. For a moment, I just stood there, the plastic bags trembling in my hands. My room suddenly felt like a crime scene. My posters, my books, the quilt Grandma had sewn. All of it seemed like evidence in a trial I had already lost. I started packing, my hands moving without thought. Every slam of a dresser drawer echoed through the night. I stuffed clothes, shoes, textbooks into bags, the sound of rustling plastic filling the silence. My chest burned with humiliation, but beneath it, something else was growing. Something hot, something sharp. Half an hour later, I dragged the first bag downstairs. The house was dark, except for the faint glow of the TV. Dad was still in his recliner, pretending to watch some late-night rerun. He didn't look up when I passed. He didn't move when I struggled with the bag, its weight pulling at my shoulder. "Dad," I whispered, my voice breaking. Nothing. Another bag, then another. Lorraine appeared at the bottom of the stairs, arms crossed, a satisfied smile on her face. "Don't forget the closet. You don't want us mailing your junk to Goodwill." The last of my things piled up by the front door like black balloons at a funeral. My funeral. When everything was ready, Lorraine flung the door open. The December air rushed in, sharp and bitter, wrapping around me like knives. The porch light buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. "Out," she said simply. I stepped onto the porch, the trash bags piled behind me, my breath fogging in the cold. My hands were numb, my body shaking, not just from the weather, but from the weight of what was happening. I turned back one last time, hoping, praying Dad would finally stand up, that he'd finally choose me. But he didn't. He sat frozen, eyes glued to the screen as if I were invisible. Lorraine's voice cut through the night. "Close the door, George." And he did. The slam echoed down the street. For a moment, I couldn't move. My entire life, everything I'd fought for, was behind that door, locked away in a house that no longer wanted me. The street was empty, the silence so deep it felt like the world had ended, and I was the only one left. I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering, and looked at the dark sky. I had no car, no money, no home, but I had something they didn't know. I had a memory burned into me, so deep it would never fade. Grandma's voice, the night before she died, whispering, "Don't let them take everything from you." That was when I made my vow. If they thought they could erase me, they were wrong. They hadn't seen the last of me. The first night I spent on Maya's couch, I barely slept. Her apartment was small, just a one-bedroom above a laundromat that hummed all night. But to me, it felt like freedom and humiliation rolled into one. I was grateful for the blanket she tossed over me, the cracked leather couch that sagged in the middle, the sound of her soft snoring through the thin wall. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the front door slamming in my face. Lorraine's smirk. Dad's silence. I woke up before sunrise, heart racing, like I was late for something, though I had nowhere to be. The apartment smelled faintly of detergent and burnt coffee, and the neon light from the laundromat blinked through the blinds, painting the room in sharp flashes. Each time it flickered, I felt like I was back on the porch, shivering, holding those garbage bags of my life. Maya padded out of her room barefoot, yawning, her hair a tangled mess. She looked at me with pity in her eyes, and I hated it. "You can stay as long as you need," she said. "Seriously, don't worry about it." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Thanks." But inside I was already worrying. I couldn't live like this forever. I needed to find a job, a plan, something. The days blurred together. I filled out applications online, circling ads in the free newspaper Maya picked up on her way home from class. I walked the strip mall 3 blocks away, handing out resumes to places that barely glanced at me before shoving them into piles. At night, I sat on Maya's couch scrolling job boards, my stomach tight from eating too many instant noodles. Every rejection felt personal. Every "we're not hiring" or "we'll keep your application on file" reminded me that Lorraine was probably laughing, Janelle was probably bragging, Brent was probably gaming in the room that used to be mine. The thought clawed at me. One night, after another fruitless day, I sat staring at the ceiling, listening to the spin cycle from below. Maya came out of her room, holding 2 mugs of cocoa. "You'll figure it out," she said, handing me one. "You always do." Her words were kind, but they pressed against the ache inside me, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I would. Then the letter came. It was a thick envelope, the kind that feels important the moment you touch it. My name was typed neatly on the front, no return address. At first, I thought it was another rejection from one of the offices I'd applied to. But when I tore it open, my hands went cold. Inside was a letter on heavy cream paper with a law firm's name stamped at the top. "Miss Harper Ellison, you are requested to appear at the offices of Bellamy and Rowe, attorneys at law, regarding the estate of your late grandmother, Margaret Ellison. Please contact us immediately to schedule an appointment." I read it twice, my pulse quickening. Grandma's estate? No one had told me there was anything left. Lorraine had made it seem like Grandma's passing had been the end of everything. The house sold, the savings gone. But this letter said otherwise. I showed it to Maya, my hand shaking. "Do you think this means?" "It means you go," she said, eyes wide. "Tomorrow, no matter what." The next morning, I put on the cleanest outfit I had, a wrinkled blouse and black jeans, and took the bus downtown. The law firm's office towered above the street, glass and steel gleaming in the winter sun. My reflection in the door looked small, out of place, like a girl playing dress-up. Inside, everything smelled of leather and polish. A receptionist with a clipped tone directed me to the 12th floor. My palms were sweating by the time I stepped into the lawyer's office. Mr. Rowe was an older man with silver hair and glasses that slid down his nose. He motioned for me to sit. "Thank you for coming, Miss Ellison," he said, folding his hands. "I'll get right to the point. Your grandmother left specific instructions regarding her estate, and they concern you directly." My breath caught. He slid a folder across the desk. I opened it, scanning the pages. My grandmother's handwriting was there, shaky but familiar. "To my granddaughter Harper, I leave." I couldn't read further. My eyes blurred, my hands trembling. Why didn't anyone tell me? I whispered. Mr. Rowe adjusted his glasses. "That's what we need to discuss. There are conditions, and I believe certain members of your family may have deliberately withheld this from you." My chest tightened. Of course they had. Lorraine, Brent, Janelle, even Dad. I leaned closer, my voice barely steady. "What kind of conditions?" He gave me a long, measured look, the kind that could change everything. And in that moment, I knew. Whatever Grandma had planned, it wasn't just an inheritance. It was a weapon she had left in my hands. When Mr. Rowe slid the folder across the desk, I felt the weight of it before I even opened it. Heavy paper, embossed seal, the kind of official permanence that couldn't be argued away by Lorraine's sneer or Dad's silence. My grandmother's handwriting danced across the first page, uneven but strong. I forced myself to read. To my granddaughter Harper Ellison, I leave a trust to be held in her name. My vision blurred, my throat tightening. I blinked hard, pressing my fingertips against the page until the words sharpened again. In the amount of $450,000. My chair creaked as I shifted back, breath catching. The number didn't make sense. I had to read it again, slower, like maybe I'd added an extra zero in my head. But it was there, clear as daylight. $450,000. More money than I'd ever seen. More than I could even imagine. My heart thudded in my chest. I thought of the garbage bags on the porch, the smirk on Lorraine's face as the door slammed. I thought of Janelle clutching her fake tears, Brent gaming in his chair with the lights off. And now this truth Lorraine had buried. I looked up at Mr. Rowe, my voice shaky. She left this for me? He nodded slowly. Yes, but there are conditions. The word dropped like a stone. Of course there were conditions. Grandma never handed out anything without a test. She'd always said, people's true faces show when money's on the line. What kind of conditions? I asked. Mr. Rowe steepled his fingers, leaning forward. Your grandmother was deliberate. She wanted to make sure this money went to the right hands and that you wouldn't be manipulated. The trust becomes yours fully at 25. But until then, you're entitled to living expenses and educational support. 25. I was 23. 2 years. 2 long years. My stomach sank. But there's more, he said, lowering his voice. If you demonstrate stability, holding consistent employment, completing at least 1 educational certification, then portions of the trust can be released earlier. Your grandmother wanted you to have the means to build something for yourself, not just a windfall to spend recklessly. I swallowed, the word sticking in my throat. Stability, employment, education. That was everything I was fighting for right now. So I just follow the rules and it's mine? He hesitated, and that hesitation chilled me. That's how it should be, he said finally. But your stepmother, she's contesting the trust. She's claiming you're unfit, that you lack the character your grandmother intended. My nails dug into the edge of the folder. She already knows? His eyes softened. She's known since the day your grandmother passed. She and her son Brent were both informed. They've been trying to challenge the terms quietly, hoping you'd never find out. My chest burned, the betrayal cutting deeper with every word. Lorraine had kicked me out with garbage bags, knowing I had this waiting for me. She'd thrown me into the cold while planning to strip me of everything Grandma left behind. She can't do that, I whispered, though it sounded more like a plea than a statement. She can try, Mr. Rowe said gravely. And she is trying. If you don't act fast, they'll take everything. The words echoed in my head, louder than the hum of the city outside, louder than the sound of my own heartbeat. Take everything. Lorraine's smirk flashed in my mind. Brent's lazy grin. Janelle's fake tears. Dad's silence. This wasn't just about money. This was about erasing me. I closed the folder slowly, my hands trembling, and in that moment I knew they declared war. And I wasn't about to lose. I never got an invitation. Of course I didn't. Lorraine made sure of that. But the moment I saw the cluster of SUVs and sedans lining up the long driveway of my father's house, I knew something was happening. Something I wasn't supposed to see. The sky was gray, heavy with December clouds, the kind that looked like they were holding back a storm. I parked down the street, my old Honda coughing as I turned off the engine. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. It wasn't curiosity that drove me, it was instinct. That gnawing gut feeling that whispers when your enemies are plotting behind closed doors. Through the glowing bay windows I saw them. A Christmas tree glittered in the corner of the living room. Fake snow sprayed on its branches, ornaments sparkling like the family I no longer had. Around the dining table they were gathered. Lorraine in her red dress, laughing too loudly. Brent in some oversized hoodie, his headset hanging around his neck like a badge. Janelle, glass of wine in hand, pouting and posing even when no one was looking. And my father, quiet, watching. Like always, I slid out of my car and moved closer, my boots crunching softly on the frosted grass. The cold bit into my cheeks, but I barely felt it. My eyes were fixed on them. Lorraine raised her glass. I couldn't hear the words through the glass, but the smug grin on her face told me enough. When the front door opened suddenly, someone had stepped out to smoke. I crept closer, the December wind cutting across my face as her voice carried outside. "To cutting her off for good," she said, and the others laughed, glasses clinking. My chest tightened, heat flooding through me despite the cold. They were celebrating me being discarded, erased. I pressed myself against the wall, the scent of cigarette smoke wafting as Brent stepped onto the porch, lighter sparking. His laugh was ugly, loud, and careless. "She's done," Lorraine continued inside, her voice sharp even through the crack in the door. "By the time the lawyer finishes, there won't be a dime left for her. Not one. It's all ours." My stomach twisted. The bile rose in my throat. They were feasting on my downfall, toasting with expensive wine while I was scraping pennies on Maya's couch. I should have walked away. That would have been smarter. But something in me wanted to stay, to watch, to gather every poisonous word they said. Brent flicked his cigarette into the yard and stomped it out, muttering she never deserved it anyway. All she did was mope around, crying about Grandma. Good riddance. I gripped the porch rail until my knuckles burned. But then Janelle's voice floated out, higher, syrupy sweet but dripping with venom. And Daddy's finally doing the right thing. Signing over his pension to Mom was the smartest move. At least now she's in charge, not Harper. The world tilted. Pension. Signed over. My father. I leaned back, chest heaving, my breath fogging in the night air. Janelle's words burned into my ears, each one sharper than the last. My father hadn't just stood silent when I was dragged out with trash bags. He hadn't just watched me freeze on the porch. He'd chosen Lorraine, chosen to give her everything. Even the security he promised me as a little girl when he used to say, "No matter what, I'll make sure you're taken care of." My knees weakened, the frost seeping through my jeans as I crouched in the dark, the laughter spilling from the house like knives in my skin. For the first time, the truth crashed down on me with no escape. I hadn't just lost my home. I had lost my father too. And in that moment, something inside me broke, and something else, colder, sharper, was born in its place. When the call came, I almost didn't pick up. The screen lit up with Dad's number, a name I hadn't seen since the night I was shoved out into the cold with nothing but trash bags and a cracked phone charger. My thumb hovered over the green button. Every instinct screaming that answering would only reopen wounds I'd barely begun to scab over. But curiosity is a cruel thing. "Harper," he said when I finally pressed accept. His voice was low, the same tone he used when I was little and scraped my knee, the same tone that once made me believe he would always protect me. "Dad," I said flatly. There was a pause. I could hear Lorraine's laugh in the background, distant but sharp like glass breaking. He must have moved rooms because suddenly it went quiet. "Christmas Eve dinner," he said. "Come home. Let's work things out." I froze. The words hung heavy, pulling me in two directions. Every memory of slammed doors and Lorraine's sneer told me to hang up. But another part, the part that still longed for my father's arms around me, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the peace offering I'd been begging for my whole life. "I don't know if that's a good idea," I muttered. "You're my daughter," he said quickly, almost desperate. "And it's Christmas. Just come." The line clicked dead before I could answer. I spent hours staring at Maya's couch ceiling that night. Her apartment smelled of burnt coffee and laundry detergent, comforting in its clutter. She warned me not to go, her voice firm as she folded blankets. "They're setting you up, Harper. You don't just get an invite out of nowhere after everything." I know, I whispered. But deep down, I didn't know. I wanted to believe. The next evening, I found myself driving toward the house. Snowflakes fell heavy against the windshield, swirling in the glow of the headlights. My stomach twisted with every mile. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my palms were slick against the steering wheel. The house was alive with golden light. Through the windows, I could see shadows moving, laughter echoing faintly into the night. When I stepped onto the porch, my chest tightened. The same porch where I'd been banished weeks ago. I rang the bell, and when the door opened, Lorraine stood there. Her red lipstick curved into a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Well, well, the prodigal daughter returns. I forced a smile. Merry Christmas, Lorraine. She stepped aside with a sweep of her arm, the scent of her perfume wrapping around me like poison. Inside, the air was thick with cinnamon, roasted turkey, and tension. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years, all seated around the long table. Their chatter dipped as I walked in, eyes darting between me and Lorraine. "Harper!" my father said too loudly, standing as though to make a point. His arms opened stiffly. I stepped into his embrace, wooden, searching for warmth that wasn't there. "Glad you came," he muttered. For a moment, I let myself believe. Maybe he meant it. Maybe Lorraine's grip on him had loosened. Maybe this was the first step back. We sat down. Plates clattered. Wine glasses filled. Conversation slowly resumed. Janelle sat across from me, her smile as sugary as her sequined dress. "So, Harper," she said sweetly, "what have you been up to? Couch surfing? Or did you finally land that glamorous retail job you were always chasing?" A few snickers rippled down the table. My cheeks burned. Before I could respond, Lorraine tapped her glass. The sound silenced the room. She rose, the queen in her kingdom, her red dress catching the light. "I think it's time we clear the air," she announced. "After all, family deserves the truth." My stomach dropped. She turned to me, voice dripping honey. "Harper, dear, we're all concerned about you. The choices you've made, the lies you've told, the things you've taken." Gasps circled the table. Someone whispered, "Taken?" "I never," I started, but she cut me off with a raised hand. "Your stepsister was kind enough not to press charges when money went missing from her wallet," Lorraine said, her voice slicing through me. "And yet here you are, sitting at her table as though you deserved to be here." The blood roared in my ears. Janelle smirked, tilting her glass. Brent chuckled into his mashed potatoes. My father sat frozen, eyes fixed on his plate. No defense, no denial, just silence. The humiliation was suffocating. Every eye at the table burned into me, weighing me down, branding me the outcast, the thief. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping the floor. The room seemed to tilt, the lights too bright, the air too thick. "I won't do this," I whispered, though my voice shook. I turned toward the door. No one stopped me, not even him. The night air hit my face, sharp and cold. Snow crunched beneath my boots as I walked to my car, each step heavier than the last. But this time there were no tears. This time, something inside me hardened. I looked back at the house one last time. The golden windows glowed like a stage, and inside, Lorraine basked in her victory. But she didn't know the truth. She hadn't broken me. She'd created me. And as I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, a vow crystallized in my chest. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. I didn't sleep the night after Christmas Eve dinner. I sat in Maya's darkened living room, staring at the faint glow of the streetlight through the blinds, my jaw clenched so tightly my teeth ached. The humiliation replayed on a cruel loop in my head. Lorraine's smug voice, Janelle's smirk, my father's silence. For years, I had cried after nights like that. Cried until my face was raw, until sleep finally dragged me under. But not this time. This time, the anger boiled, too hot for tears. By dawn, A decision had crystallized inside me. They thought they'd crushed me. They thought I'd crawl away and disappear. But I wasn't disappearing. I was coming for them. I started small. Maya's laptop became my weapon. I spent hours combing through anything I could find. Old news articles, property records, court filings. The internet was a graveyard of secrets, and I intended to dig up every bone Lorraine had ever buried. At first, it was exhausting. Dead ends, half-truths, documents that led nowhere. I'd fall asleep with the laptop still open, my neck aching, only to jolt awake at 3 a.m. and keep going. Doubt gnawed at me in the quiet moments. Who was I kidding? I was just one girl with no money, no power, no allies. Lorraine had the house, the influence, the loyalty of my own father. I had a couch. But every time the doubt whispered, I remembered her face at the table, the satisfaction in her eyes when she humiliated me. That memory lit the fire again. So I documented everything. Every lie she told, every manipulation. I wrote it all down in a journal, filling page after page with her tactics. Gaslighting, financial control, emotional warfare. A pattern so clear it was undeniable. And then, finally, something surfaced. It started with a slip of paper I found wedged in the bottom of a box of my grandmother's old files that Maya had stored for me. It was a bank statement years old, but it listed my father's retirement account. The balance didn't match what I remembered him bragging about when I was a teenager. It was smaller, a lot smaller. That curiosity led me deeper. I requested public pension records, something most people didn't even know you could access if you filed the right forms. It took weeks, but when the envelope arrived, my hands trembled opening it. The numbers didn't add up. Money had been withdrawn, large sums at regular intervals. And the signature? Not my father's. It was hers, Lorraine's. The realization hit me like ice water. Lorraine wasn't just cruel. She was stealing from him, from my father, from the very man she claimed to love and protect. At first, I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, my pulse racing in my ears. I paced Maya's kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles whitened. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was fraud. This was criminal. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at the papers. Part of me wanted to march straight to my father, shove the evidence in his face, and watch his illusion of her shatter. But then another thought crept in. What if he didn't believe me? He hadn't believed me about anything else. He'd chosen her side again and again. If I went to him too soon, she'd twist it, spin another lie, make me the villain again. No, this time I had to be smarter. The sleepless nights stretched on. I pored over every line of every document, highlighting, circling, cross-referencing. My journal filled with arrows and notes until the pages looked like a conspiracy theorist's wall. Maya worried about me. She'd find me hunched over the laptop at 4 a.m., eyes bloodshot, fingers shaking from too much coffee. "Harper, you're driving yourself into the ground," she whispered one night, resting a hand on my shoulder. "I can't stop," I muttered. "If I stop, she wins." Maya sighed, but she didn't argue. She just refilled my mug and sat beside me, silent support in the chaos. And then it happened. The breakthrough. Buried in a stack of pension forms, I found a signature page that Lorraine had clearly forged. The handwriting was sloppy, the dates didn't match, and attached to it was a notarization stamp that didn't belong to any licensed notary in our county. It was the smoking gun. Proof that Lorraine had been draining my father's retirement fund under his nose. Proof that she wasn't just manipulative, she was a thief. I sat there, staring at the paper, my hands trembling. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than exhaustion and rage. I felt power, because I knew exactly how to use it. And in that moment, a new thought took root. If Lorraine could take from him so easily, how long before she came for what my grandmother had left me? I folded the papers carefully, sliding them into a folder I kept hidden under Maya's couch cushions. My heart raced with equal parts fear and exhilaration. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was fighting back. And this time, I had the weapon that could destroy her. They told me revenge was a slow thing. They were right. It took patience, 1,000 tiny steps I never wanted to take, and it smelled like stale coffee and printer ink. It tasted like cold pizza eaten at midnight on Maya's kitchen table while I spread paperwork over the linoleum like battle plans. Mr. Rowe had been cautious the first time we met after I brought him what I'd found, the pension withdrawals, the sloppy notarization, the forged signature. He had a way of folding his hands that made you think important decisions were being made inside his skull even when nothing had changed. But when I watched him flip through the pages I'd taped together, the color left his face. He stopped pretending the law was a gentle thing. He looked like a man who had seen a storm coming for a long time and was suddenly sure it had reached the shore. "Miss Ellison," he said, his voice low, "you've done good work here. This is enough to at least open an inquiry." He tapped the papers with his pen, careful like they might explode. "But you must be careful. If Lorraine gets wind that you're preparing a case, she will fight. She is aggressive." That was an understatement. Lorraine didn't fight. She swallowed people. She used a smile like a pair of scissors, cutting away anything that threatened her image. She had friends at the bank. She had a way of presenting herself as the caring stepmother in public, and that gave her cover. The law, we both knew, would move slowly. And when the law moved slowly, people with money and power bought time. "So what do we do?" I asked. My hands wouldn't stop twitching. I had cataloged the signatures, highlighted dates, cross-referenced withdrawal patterns with holidays and purchases. It made a kind of ugly art on the page. "We build a paper trail they can't dispute," Mr. Rowe said. "We gather witnesses. We get accountants to analyze the withdrawals. We file motions to freeze transfers if necessary, and we handle it quietly. The fewer people who know, the better." Quietly. That word sat on my tongue like a stone. Quiet had never been my style. I'd cried in public, argued with teachers, marched into work late more times than I'd admit. But Mr. Rowe was right. This wasn't some impulsive confrontation at the dinner table. This was chess. You moved pieces, and you sacrificed pawns for a queen. I had to think like someone who'd been taught the rules. I had to be smarter than Lorraine, and that meant patience. The next weeks became a blur of appointments and late nights. Mr. Rowe introduced me to an accountant named Elise, who smelled faintly of citrus and authority. Elise taught me how to read bank ledgers like they were maps. She showed me how money could move quietly, siphoned in tiny amounts so it didn't trigger alarms. Lorraine hadn't stolen in a single dramatic heist. She had bled the account slowly. Dozens of small withdrawals that, when lined up next to each other, formed a river. "Look here," Elise said one night, pressing a page against the lamp. "These ACH transfers line up with Lorraine's card purchases at the boutique downtown. These checks were cashed in the same week. She makes large payments against the property in her name. Someone helped her cover bookkeeping. Maybe an inside person at the bank, maybe someone at Dad's office." I felt hot and sick at the same time. Inside person. Cover bookkeeping. It was worse than I'd imagined. But every piece of detail also felt like coal to feed a fire. I'd been cold for weeks. I was ready to burn. We set up a secure folder on a flash drive and copied everything. Mr. Rowe told me to keep it in a safe place, but safe felt like a relative term when your enemies lived in your old house. I chose instead to memorize the names and dates and lock them away in my mind like mantras. That was the beginning of my new life, memorizing documents. There were times I wanted to scream it into the sky, to take the papers, march back into the kitchen of that house, and drop them across the table while Lorraine's smile dissolved into real fear. But I didn't. Patience. Quiet. Build. Every victory was tiny. We subpoenaed bank statements. We filed a preliminary motion. One evening, as the paperwork stacked higher, Elise and I managed to get a frozen lift placed on a few suspicious transfers. It felt like winning a round in a boxing match. Lorraine would notice. She would feel something tug at her bottom line and scratch. We had to be ready for her snapback. The problem was, I wasn't the only one moving. Lorraine moved in darkness, but she moved fast. She called her lawyer, the kind with a voice that sounded expensive and a suit that smelled faintly of power, and he started filing counters. He got notices to my father saying that someone, me, I presumed, was interfering with family affairs. The house buzzed with visits from men with leather briefcases. Mr. Rowe warned me, she's going to push. She'll try to make your father doubt you. She'll use family members against you. Expect nastiness. Nastiness arrived on a Thursday. I was at Maya's when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. We know what you're doing. Stop now. No name. No signature. Just a threat. I stared at it until the letters blurred. Maya tried to be casual. Block and report, she said, but I didn't. I saved the message, then went to Mr. Rowe with it. He frowned, the way you do when something gets under your skin you can't ignore. You're touching a nerve, he said. His office suddenly felt small, the blinds closed tight. If they start threatening, that means they're losing control. Threats are cowardice wearing a brand new suit. They rely on fear. But my fear has a face now. The face that sat across from me at Christmas. The face that watched me pack trash bags. Fear is manageable if you name it. And then the other shoe dropped. Brent had always been a ghost in the house. He ate cereal at midnight, played his games until dawn, and called for pizza like it was a royal decree. He puffed himself up with online followers and the illusion of independence. He was a teenager in a man's body, a coward who wore arrogance like armor. I wasn't thinking of him when I should have been. I was thinking of bank statements and affidavits, of subpoenas and freeze orders. But Lorraine's network didn't consist of lawyers and haughty friends alone. It had small soldiers, people who would do her dirty work. It started with a noise at the family office, the small room in Dad's garage where he kept files and old tax returns, the place no one went because the light flickered and old paper smelled like dust. I'd been there twice before with permission from Mr. Rowe to copy documents. The first time I took a careful photo of a ledger that matched the withdrawals. The second time I returned to collect receipts tucked into the pages of a ledger. We were building a case like burglars who cleaned up after themselves. This time I'd gone at night. My stomach was knotted as I pushed the garage door open a sliver, the cold slicing my face. The house sat silent behind me, wrapped in its own hush. I moved like a shadow, key in my pocket, breath shallow. The door to the office opened with a soft creak. The desk lamp spilled a small pool of light over the paperwork. My hands shook as I rifled through a manila folder and found what I needed. 2 receipts, one a wire transfer, one a credit card statement. The signatures matched the ones we had shown Mr. Rowe. Proof, proof, proof. I slipped them into my jacket, heart thudding. That's when the chair behind me creaked. Looking for something, Harper? I froze. The voice was soft, too normal, like a neighbor who hadn't seen you in a while. But there was a danger in it, a casualness that connoted control. Brent leaned forward from the doorway, the glow of the hallway light haloing his headset. He had that stupid grin on his face that usually meant he'd just won some petty internet victory. But it didn't reach his eyes tonight. You shouldn't be here, he said. I stared at him like he was a sudden bruise, blooming on my skin. I have permission from Mr. Rowe to copy these, I lied quickly. Lies are muscle memory. You train them and they come when you need them. He laughed, a sound that didn't belong to someone who felt threatened. Mr. Rowe? Really? He's been busy. Lorraine called with some concerns about unauthorized people snooping around. He stepped into the room, blocking the doorway. The house behind him was a dark silhouette. My hands moved before my brain did. I reached in my jacket for the flash drive, for the folder, for anything. He noticed and moved like a predator. You think you're clever, he said, closing the space between us. Thinking you can go through Daddy's things and dig for dirt? You're pathetic. His voice had that dangerous edge now. the one that turned jokes into knives. I should have left. I should have run. But he had me in the garage like a mouse caught in a corner. My body did not obey the calmer part of me. "What do you want?" I asked, though I already knew. I never wanted him to think he'd scared me. He leaned in, his breath warm and smelling of the takeout he always kept in the fridge. "You're sticking your nose where it doesn't belong," he said. "You make any trouble for Mom and me, we'll make your life a living hell." I could see the shadow of Lorraine through the hallway mirror, a sliver of movement in the living room, and my chest constricted like a fist closing around a balloon. He was not alone. They had eyes. They had ways of knowing. "You don't have to," I started to say, voice thin. I was bargaining, and bargaining is a slow death. Brent's smile turned cruel. He lifted a hand and tapped his phone, the screen lighting his face in a ghostly blue. "We know things, Harper. People talk. People watch. You disappear, and we'll make sure no one even remembers your name." I swallowed. The amount of contempt in his words tasted like bile. "You think that scares me?" I said, more loudly than I meant to. The garage felt suddenly too small, as if the walls leaned in. He got close enough that his breath fogged the air between us. He smelled like stale deodorant and paper. Up close, his features were younger than his age, stubbornly immature. He crossed his arms. "If you breathe a word," he said softly, like a lullaby, "you're finished." The sentence landed like an iron lid closing. It wasn't a threat in the abstract. It was a promise with weight. The future I'd been mapping, Mr. Rowe and Elise and subpoenas and frozen accounts, suddenly felt fragile, as thin as tissue paper in a storm. I thought of my grandmother, who'd taught me to braid hair on the porch swing and hum while she worked. She told me that people like Lorraine didn't understand the cost of honesty. They just took what they wanted and pretended they were saints. My knees went weak. For a second, the exhausted part of me wanted to lie down on the cold garage floor and let the world roll over me. It would be easier to be erased than to keep fighting. I imagined Lorraine's victory, like a monument being erected on the street corner, polished, gleaming, and me, a small carved stone in the shadow of it. But there was another thought, quick as a cat. If I stopped all the work, Elise's analysis, Mr. Rowe's quiet motions, the weeks of copying and cross-referencing, would mean nothing. Stopping would hand them the win. I set my jaw. "You don't get to decide that," I said. My voice was rough, but steady. Even if my heart was pounding like a trapped animal, I had to sound like someone who couldn't be toyed with. He smiled again, a dangerous flash. "That's cute." He took another step closer, and the darkness in the hallway felt suddenly full of watching faces. "You keep digging, you'll find out how merciless people can be." He turned and left, the door clicking behind him, the sound of his footsteps muffled by carpet. I stood there paralyzed for a moment, the papers in my hand suddenly heavier than they had any right to be. When I drove back to Maya's that night, the heater in my car barely warmed me. I kept replaying his words, the tone, the casualness. "If you breathe a word, you're finished." The sentence etched itself under my skin like a tattoo I hadn't asked for. Mr. Rowe was calm when I told him, but I could see the lines harden around his mouth. "We expected intimidation," he said, but the words did little to soothe the rawness in my chest. He started giving me instructions like a coach preparing a fighter. "Don't go to the house alone. Change your phone number if you receive more threats. Keep a log of everything. Don't post anything online. We'll coordinate through the firm." Coordination felt weak against the bluntness of Brent's words. It felt like rubber gloves in a world where knives were allowed. But Mr. Rowe's next steps were practical and meant the difference between a rash fight and a strategic one. He helped me get a temporary restraining move on the transfers. He requested an emergency hearing to block Lorraine from touching certain accounts until the court could rule. We had momentum, and momentum scared them. That night, though, the fear lingered like smoke. I lay awake on Maya's couch, listening to the building hum outside, thinking about the neat curve of Brent's smile and the casual menace behind his tone. I thought about the flash drive tucked under the cushion of an old chair in the living room, the one place I'd chosen to hide documents before because no one would look there. Maybe I'd been naive. Maybe bravery and greed had different definitions in a house full of liars. The trap we were building was real, but so was the risk of it collapsing on us if one strand broke. I pulled out my journal, the one where I'd been writing timelines and notes and quiet obsessions. I wrote Brent's words in capital letters. If you breathe a word, you're finished. Then I drew a line under it and wrote, smaller, a plan, record, backup, witnesses, public record, freeze accounts, don't go alone. It all felt cold and clinical, like planning a burglary with legal backup. But that's what the truth required: patience, cunning, and record-keeping. If Lorraine wanted a war, I was building an arsenal. The next morning, Elise called with the report. The figures were now clear, the transfers matched with credit card purchases, and several accomplices emerged on paper. Vendors, possibly complicit employees, and one suspiciously friendly trustee who had been allowed to approve disbursements. Mr. Rowe moved like oil spreading, filing new motions, sending subpoenas. Phones began to ring in our favor. Lawyers I'd never met, investigators who smelled money and dishonesty like hounds. But I also realized something else in the quiet that followed. Intimidation could be a mirror. You're not the only one who can use fear. If they threaten me like a dog barking to scare away intruders, then I could be a bigger threat. Not by matching them violence for violence, but by turning light on their dark moves, by bringing evidence to people who couldn't be bought. Still, the words Brent had said reverberated with each phone call, each motion filed. He'd put a line in the sand. He didn't realize that when you threaten someone who's already been erased, you light a fuse instead of putting out a candle. We had momentum. We had risk. And I had something else: stubbornness. As the sun set on another day of subpoenas and phone calls, I made a promise to myself that sounded both ridiculous and necessary. I would not be finished. Not by threats, not by manipulations, not by the crass cruelty of a man who called himself my brother. I would press on, quietly, methodically, and make whatever came next inevitable. There was a long road ahead. The trap we were building had too many moving parts to fail. But more than anything, I wanted Lorraine to feel the first tremor. I wanted her to know that I existed and that the woman she'd attempted to erase had a voice loud enough to undo her. Brent's last words echoed in the dark when I finally dropped my head onto the couch and let the exhaustion take me. They were meant to silence me. Instead, they became the last thing I wrote before sleep. You tried to scare me. I'm not finished. And somewhere between the clock's tick and the street's distant glow, I felt the first real stirrings of strategy turn into momentum. The week after Brent's threat felt like I was walking around with a time bomb strapped to my chest. Every second ticked, louder than the last. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I kept going over the confrontation in my head. His face too close to mine, his voice dripping with menace. If you breathe a word, you're finished. But beneath the fear, something else kept pressing against my chest, something I couldn't bury no matter how hard I tried. My dad. For all his silence, for all the times he'd stood by while Lorraine tore into me, I couldn't let myself believe he was gone completely. He wasn't like her, not at the core. He was the man who once stayed up all night to build my science fair volcano, who used to sneak me popsicles when Lorraine insisted sugar would ruin my teeth. He was still my father, and fathers were supposed to protect their daughters, weren't they? So I clung to that flicker of faith like a life raft. If I showed him the truth, real, undeniable proof, he would have to stand up. He would finally have to choose me. That's what I told myself the night I sat at Maya's tiny kitchen table. Stacks of printed documents spread across the cheap plastic surface. The pages looked harmless at first glance, columns of numbers, transaction histories, account transfers. But I had spent sleepless nights piecing them together like a jigsaw puzzle, and once the picture came into focus, I couldn't unsee it. Lorraine had been quietly draining my father's retirement accounts for months. thousands and thousands of dollars. It wasn't just carelessness. It was theft, cold and deliberate. I highlighted every line, stapled every packet, rehearsed every argument in my head. By the time I finally stacked the folder closed, I had convinced myself I was ready. Saturday afternoon, I drove back to the house I once called home. My stomach was in knot the whole way. The familiar streets, the Christmas lights strung on neighbors' porches, the wreaths on front doors. It all felt like a cruel joke. Everyone else seemed to be celebrating warmth and family, while I was about to walk into a battlefield. When I pulled into the driveway, my chest squeezed tight. Janelle's boyfriend's truck was there. Brent's Jeep, too. For a second, I nearly put the car in reverse and drove away. But the folder sat heavy on the passenger seat, a reminder that if I ran now, I'd lose everything. I got out, clutching the folder so hard the edges dug into my palms. The cold air bit at my cheeks, carrying the faint smell of pine from the wreath Lorraine had insisted on hanging every year. The porch steps creaked under my weight, familiar and alien all at once. Inside, the house smelled the same as always, a mix of lemon cleaner and Lorraine's perfume, sharp and artificial, like roses dipped in chemicals. It hit me in the chest the moment I stepped in, making me want to gag. Dad was in the den, slouched in his old leather recliner. The TV glowed in front of him, a football game running with the sound turned low. His hair looked thinner, his shoulders more hunched than I remembered. For a second, I almost pitied him. "Dad," I said softly. His eyes flicked to me, then back to the screen. He didn't speak. I stepped closer, my throat tight. "I need to talk to you," I said. "It's important." He didn't answer, but he did mute the TV, and his eyes darted toward the kitchen. That little flicker gave me hope. Maybe he was afraid of Lorraine overhearing. Maybe he wanted me to talk, but didn't know how to start. I took a shaky breath, pulled the folder from my bag, and laid it on the coffee table. My hands trembled as I spread the pages out. "I've been digging," I said. "She's been stealing from your retirement fund. Look, thousands are gone, Dad. This is proof." For the first time, he leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, scanning the papers. His brows knitted together, and I saw it, the recognition, the shock. My heart lifted. He knew. He couldn't deny it now. But then something shifted. His face closed off like a curtain dropping. His lips pressed into a thin line. He leaned back in the chair away from me and rubbed his jaw. "Where'd you get this?" he asked. "I cross-checked the accounts," I explained quickly. "It's public if you know where to look. Dad, she's draining you. This isn't just about me anymore. She's going to leave you with nothing." He stared at the TV, his jaw tight. For a moment, silence stretched so long I thought he'd break. Then he exhaled, long and heavy, and said, "You shouldn't be digging in this stuff. You don't know what you're looking at." My chest dropped. "What?" "Dad, the numbers don't lie." I said, "Drop it." His voice was sharp like a whip crack. I froze. It felt like someone had punched me. "Dad," I whispered, desperate now. "Please. She's not just lying about me anymore. She's stealing from you. Can't you see what she's doing?" His jaw tightened. He didn't look at me. He picked up the remote, turned the volume back up on the TV, and said the words that would carve into me forever. "Go home, Harper." The sound of the crowd cheering on the muted screen filled the room, but my world went silent. My father, my last hope, had chosen her. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My legs carried me out of the den, down the hall, and out the door like I was on autopilot. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking so badly I dropped the keys twice before I could fit them into the ignition. I don't remember much of the drive back to Maya's, just the blur of Christmas lights outside the window and the pounding of my own heart in my ears. When I finally stumbled into her apartment, she looked up from the couch, concern etched across her face. "Harper, what happened?" I couldn't answer. I just shoved the folder onto the table and sank into a chair, numb. My phone buzzed in my pocket and Maya pulled it out. It's Lorraine, she said, frowning. She called twice. She left a message. My stomach twisted into knots. I snatched the phone and pressed play. Her voice slithered through the speaker, smooth and venomous. "So, you've been playing detective," she drawled. "Cute. You thought you could run to Daddy and win him over? Let me tell you something. You'll never beat me. Not in this house. Not in this family. Not anywhere. This is my world, Harper. And you? You're just a guest who overstayed her welcome." There was a pause, then a low, cruel laugh. The message ended, but I kept the phone pressed to my ear, frozen. Maya reached out. "Harper." I pulled away, shaking my head. My heart pounded, so hard I thought it might burst. My father had betrayed me. He had run straight to her. And now she knew everything. I wasn't just fighting for money or recognition anymore. I was fighting against someone who would burn me to the ground if it meant keeping her crown. Her words replayed in my head, over and over, until they branded themselves into me. "You'll never beat me." And in that moment, for the first time, I wasn't broken by them. I was fueled by them. Because if Lorraine wanted a war, then a war was exactly what she was going to get. I woke up with my phone buzzing on the nightstand, the glow of a Facebook notification lighting up the dark room. Maya was already asleep, curled under her blanket on the couch across from me. I rubbed my eyes, unlocked my phone, and there it was, Lorraine's smug face plastered all over my feed. She had tagged half the town, including members of the church congregation, announcing the Christmas morning service like it was a royal coronation. But the caption was what stopped my breath. "This year we pray for the lost, the misguided, the ones who strayed from family. Join us as we restore order and truth." I stared at it, my pulse hammering. Underneath, she had attached a picture of me. Not recent. An old one. I couldn't even remember when it had been taken. My face still rounder, hair shorter, smiling in a way I didn't anymore. She had written 3 words across the bottom in bold red letters. "Pray for Harper." Comments poured beneath the post like knives. So sad. I always knew something wasn't right with her. "Lorraine, you're such a strong woman. The devil preys on the young, but God sees your efforts." I wanted to throw my phone across the room. My throat burned with humiliation. It wasn't enough to push me out of my own home, strip me of my inheritance, twist my father against me. She wanted me destroyed publicly. She wanted the entire church, the people I'd grown up around, to sit in those pews Christmas morning and watch me get branded the black sheep in God's house. The bile rose in my throat. I whispered into the dark, "She's going to crucify me." But the room didn't stay silent. Maya stirred, sat up, and yawned before glancing at me. She saw the look on my face and frowned. What happened now? I shoved my phone at her. She scrolled for a second. Then her face twisted with anger. "She posted this? With your picture? Oh, hell no." I pressed the heels of my palms into my eyes, trying to block out the sting. "She's setting me up. She's going to humiliate me in front of everyone I ever knew." Maya tossed the phone on the coffee table, and Brent commented. My head jerked up. "What?" She scrolled again. "Look, some people never grow up. Can't wait for the service. #truth hurts." The blood roared in my ears. I could practically hear his smug voice saying it, see that arrogant grin plastered across his face. I wanted to scream. Instead, I collapsed back against the couch. I can't stop her. She's already poisoned everyone against me. Maya sat down beside me, her eyes fierce. "Don't you dare say that. You're not powerless, Harper. She's not untouchable." I shook my head. "She's got my dad. She's got the church. She's got money influence. What do I have?" Maya's mouth curved into something between a smirk and a promise. "Me. And I've been digging." My stomach flipped. Digging. She disappeared into her room and came back with a manila folder. She dropped it onto my lap. "I wasn't going to tell you yet, but after this, you need to know." I frowned, opening the folder. It wasn't numbers or bank statements this time. They were county records, marriage licenses, divorce filings, or the lack of them. I blinked at the first page. This is Lorraine's marriage certificate from 1998. Maya nodded. She married some guy named Douglas Whitmore in Nevada. But look closer. I flipped through the next pages, my eyes widening. There was no record of divorce. No annulment. Nothing. My hands started to shake. What are you saying? Maya leaned in, her voice low and sharp. I'm saying Lorraine never divorced Douglas before marrying your dad, which means her marriage to him is invalid, which means... I finished her sentence in a whisper. She's not even legally my stepmother. The room seemed to spin. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The woman who had thrown me out, who had poisoned my father against me, who was about to drag me into a church to be humiliated in front of the entire town. She wasn't even his real wife. She was a fraud. I clutched the papers to my chest, my mind racing. If this comes out, she loses everything. Maya nodded. Her credibility, her access to your dad's pension, her inheritance claims, all of it. I pressed the folder shut, my heart pounding harder than ever. For the first time in weeks, I felt the faintest flicker of control. But with it came a terrifying realization. Lorraine would destroy me before she let this secret get out. And if she was planning to put me on display Christmas morning, maybe it was time I let the whole town see the truth about her. I looked at Maya, my voice trembling but fierce. She thinks she's going to shame me. Maya raised an eyebrow, and a slow smile spread across my face, sharp as a blade. She has no idea what's coming. The next few days crawled by, each one heavier than the last. Everywhere I turned, Lorraine's shadow loomed. Posts on social media, gossip in town. Even my old high school friend texted me out of nowhere. Hey, heard about the service. You okay? No, I wasn't okay. I was being set up for a public execution in God's house. But I didn't tell her that. I just typed back, yeah, I'm fine. At night, I lay awake on Maya's couch, staring at the ceiling, gripping that folder of records like it was a lifeline. My mind kept replaying Lorraine's sneer, Brent's smirk, my father's silence. And then, every time it circled back to one thought. She isn't even legally your stepmother. The secret pulsed in my chest, electric and dangerous. But secrets only had power if you knew how to use them. And I planned to use this one like a grenade. Christmas Eve came, and the church bell rang across town. I could hear it faintly through Maya's cracked apartment window. The sound used to bring comfort when I was a child. Now it felt like a countdown. Tomorrow, Lorraine would be waiting at that pulpit, smiling sweetly, her voice dripping with false holiness. And she would call me out, tear me down, make me a spectacle. But this time I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to run. This time I was going to bring her to her knees. I sat up on the couch, pulled the papers from the folder, and whispered to myself, "You wanted a show, Lorraine. You're going to get one." The days after Maya uncovered the truth about Lorraine's marriage were like fire in my chest. Every breath I took felt sharper, hotter, more determined. The kind of rage that doesn't just fade, it calcifies into resolve. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting to Lorraine's cruelty. I was building something of my own. A plan, a trap. I spread papers across Maya's tiny coffee table. The wood so scratched from our late-night sessions, it looked like a battlefield. Documents from the lawyer, pension statements I'd copied when Lorraine wasn't paying attention, old emails my grandmother had saved, pieces of a puzzle that, if placed correctly, could take her down once and for all. The problem was, Lorraine was meticulous. Every lie she told was coded with just enough truth to make it believable. If I didn't secure airtight proof, she could twist it all back on me, and I knew she would. Night after night, I dug deeper. Public records, bank filings, even a court docket buried online with Lorraine's name attached to something suspicious. My eyes burned from staring at the screen. my fingers numb from scribbling notes. At 3 in the morning, I'd find myself pacing Maya's narrow hallway, my socks dragging on the cold tile, whispering pieces of evidence like I was memorizing lines for the biggest role of my life. Because, in a way, I knew one wrong move could set her off. Lorraine wasn't the type to play fair. She didn't need to. She had money, my father's blind loyalty, and Brent's thuggish protection. But if I kept waiting for someone else to save me, I'd end up exactly where she wanted me. Cut off, broken, erased. The scariest part was that my dad had already shown his hand. He wasn't on my side. He'd proven that when he ran straight to her the moment I trusted him, that betrayal still sat in my stomach like spoiled food. I couldn't rely on him, not anymore. From here on out, it was me against them. Every time my phone buzzed, I expected it to be Lorraine or Brent. Somehow they'd find out what I was doing. Somehow they'd corner me again. I started locking the front door twice, even though Maya teased me for being paranoid. I wasn't paranoid, I was hunted. One night, Maya leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. "You know, Harper," she said, her voice low, "this isn't just about catching them. It's about how you do it. Do you want to expose them quietly in court, or do you want to rip their masks off in front of everybody they've ever fooled?" Her words stuck with me. I pictured Lorraine's smug smile cracking in front of a packed room. I pictured Brent's cocky sneer melting into panic. I pictured my father realizing, too late, just how badly he'd chosen. So, let me ask you, if you were in my shoes, would you keep this quiet, or would you blow it up in front of the entire town? Tell me in the comments what you'd do, because I know what I was leaning toward. The decision carried me into Christmas Eve. While the rest of the world wrapped gifts and drank cocoa, I dressed in dark clothes and drove slowly past my father's house, the one that had once been my home. Snow dusted the yard, the porch light casting a yellow glow over footprints that weren't mine. I killed the engine a block away, my breath fogging in the cold, and walked the rest of the distance with my heart pounding so loud I was sure someone could hear it. The house was quiet, too quiet. I knew Lorraine was meticulous about appearances, especially with the holiday coming. Extended relatives would be there in the morning. But tonight, it was just her, Brent, and my father. My pulse quickened as I slipped the spare key from my pocket, the one I'd kept hidden years ago in the lining of an old backpack. I hadn't thought I'd ever use it, but here I was. The lock clicked softly, my fingers trembling as I pushed the door open inch by inch. The smell hit me first, pine from the Christmas tree, mixed with Lorraine's heavy perfume. My chest tightened. Every creak of the floor felt like a scream in the silence. I had maybe 30 minutes before someone walked in or woke up. I set to work fast, a camera tucked into the bookshelves in the den, another behind a decorative vase in the dining room, one more facing the office door, the room Lorraine thought was her fortress. Each placement made my nerves sharper, but also steadier. This was it. Proof. Not just paperwork or suspicions, but their words, their actions caught in real time. When I crouched near the office, sliding the tiny device onto a shelf, I froze. Voices. I pressed myself against the wall, my breath shallow. Lorraine's laugh carried through the crack of the door. "He'll never see it coming," she said, her tone dripping with venom. Brent chuckled, low and cruel. "You're ruthless. I love it. Once the account's drained, she won't have a leg to stand on. And your husband, he's so wrapped around your finger, he'll sign anything you put in front of him." My stomach dropped. They weren't just stealing, they were accelerating it, planning something that would ruin not just me, but my father too, even if he was too blind to see it. "By the time she even realizes what happened," Lorraine continued, her voice sharpening like a knife, "it'll be too late. Harper will be finished. Completely finished." I pressed a hand to my mouth, forcing myself to stay silent even though every instinct screamed to storm in, to call them out. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed every word, every damning syllable. Then Brent's voice shifted darker. And if she tries to fight back, well, I heard the scrape of a chair, the weight of his footsteps. Let's just say accidents happen. Girls like her disappear all the time. Ice shot through my veins. He wasn't just threatening me, he was serious. I backed away from the door, my legs shaking, my palms slick with sweat. The recording light on the tiny device blinked once, steady and strong. It was catching everything. But my heart was racing so fast, I thought it might give me away. I stumbled toward the exit, clutching the walls as though the house itself was trying to hold me there. The tree lights flickered, mocking me, ornaments shining like eyes. I made it to the door, slipped outside into the freezing night air, and nearly collapsed into the snow. For a moment, I just stood there, gasping, my breath visible under the porch light. I had proof. I had them. But I also had something else, a new terror clawing at my chest. Because what I just heard was darker than money, darker than fraud, darker than betrayal. Brent and Lorraine weren't just plotting to ruin me. They were plotting something far worse. And I had it all on tape. Christmas morning hit different that year. Not the soft, glowing warmth most people imagine. The stockings, the cinnamon rolls, the laughter. No. For me, it was icy steel in my veins. Every breath measured. Every step rehearsed like I was walking onto a battlefield. Because that's exactly what it was. A war zone disguised as my family's holiday gathering. I parked a block away again, watching the house lit up like something out of a catalog. Candles in every window. A massive wreath on the front door. Perfect. Fake. Inside, I knew Lorraine had orchestrated the whole performance. Her flawless decorations, her curated playlist, her staged family unity. She wanted the world to believe she was the queen of this home, the matriarch everyone adored. And for years she'd pulled it off. Not anymore. I clutched my bag tighter, the evidence heavy inside. Documents, copies, flash drives, and the most important piece, my recording device. It felt like a weapon. Because that's what it was. Walking up the snowy path, I could hear faint laughter spilling out from the living room. High-pitched and artificial. My hand hovered over the doorknob, my stomach flipping. Once I opened this door, there was no going back. When I stepped inside, the heat and smell of roasted ham hit me first, almost suffocating compared to the freezing air outside. Heads turned, but no one spoke. The laughter died instantly, replaced with an awkward silence that clung to the walls. My father sat in his armchair by the fire, staring at the flames like they could save him. Janelle stood near the tree in a glittering dress, her phone angled for selfies. Brent lounged by the mantel, smirking like he already knew the script of the play. And Lorraine, of course, sat perfectly poised at the head of the dining table, wine glass in hand, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Well," she said finally, her tone light but edged with venom, "look who decided to crawl back for Christmas." No one told me to sit. No one welcomed me. They just stared, like I was an intruder in the house I'd once called mine. I held my chin high, forcing my voice steady. "I didn't come back for you." Lorraine raised her glass. "Clearly, still clinging to your delusions, I see." My father shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. That silence, his silence, stabbed worse than her insults. It confirmed everything. He wasn't going to save me. He never would. I could have left right then, let them believe they'd won. But instead, I set my bag on the table and unzipped it slowly, deliberately. The sound cut through the silence like a blade. "You've spent years lying," I said, pulling out the first stack of papers. "Stealing. Pretending. But today," my voice cracked, then steadied, "today the lies end." Janelle scoffed. "God, Harper, not this again." But I cut her off, slamming the documents onto the table so hard her wine glass rattled. "These are records of withdrawals from Dad's retirement fund. Thousands of dollars. Over months. All signed by Lorraine." A ripple of gasps moved through the room. My father finally looked up, his eyes wide, darting between the papers and Lorraine like he didn't know which version of reality to cling to. "That's absurd," Lorraine said smoothly, though her knuckles whitened around her glass. Fabricated, I'm sure. Harper has always been creative. I didn't flinch. I pulled out the next folder, tossing it in front of her. Bank transfers. Hidden accounts in your name, Lorraine. Accounts Dad never knew about. Every dollar you siphoned is sitting here in black and white. Her mask cracked, just slightly. Brent leaned forward, muscles tense. You better watch yourself, he muttered. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. No, Brent. You watch. I dug into the bag again, my hand brushing the cold edge of the recorder. My heart thudded, so loud I could barely hear my own words. This was it, the moment. You've all ignored me, called me dramatic, told me I was nothing. But I have proof. I have your words, Lorraine. Her head snapped toward me, eyes narrowing. What did you say? I clicked play. The room filled with Lorraine's voice, cold and unmistakable. He'll never see it coming. Once the account's drained, Harper will be finished. Completely finished. Every face in the room froze. Janelle's mouth dropped open. My father's hands trembled on the armrest. And then Brent's voice followed, darker, crueler. And if she tries to fight back? Well, girls like her disappear all the time. Gasps. Murmurs. The atmosphere cracked like glass shattering. My father stood halfway, his face pale as ash. But it wasn't over, because the recording kept playing. And what came next was worse than anything I'd revealed so far. Lorraine's voice, colder than a winter storm. By the time she realizes what happened, it'll be too late. Harper won't just lose the money. She'll lose everything. And your husband? He's too blind to stop me. Soon enough, he'll be out of the way too. The room went dead silent. And I just stood there, letting it all sink in, letting the recording play out like the hammer of judgment it was. But the real bombshell, the part that would destroy everything they thought they knew, was still waiting. Because Lorraine had confessed something far worse. And I had it all on tape. The room was already split down the middle by the time the recording shifted. My chest tightened because I knew what was coming. The worst part, the part that even I hadn't been able to process the first time I heard it. Lorraine's voice slithered out of the recorder, smooth, deliberate. Don't worry about him. I've already started the paperwork. By spring, he'll be in a nursing home. The good ones make it look like love, like care. Meanwhile, I'll have access to every last dollar, every asset. He'll be too medicated to notice, too weak to fight. And Harper? She'll watch it all slip away and won't be able to stop me. The words hung in the air like poison gas. My father's face drained of all color. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. He looked at Lorraine, searching, begging for her to deny it, to laugh it off, to call it a fabrication. But she didn't. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes darted, calculating. Janelle was the first to react, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh my God, Mom, you didn't. Lorraine snapped. Shut up, Janelle. But the damage was done. The illusion of control slipped right through her manicured fingers. You are going to lock me away, my father finally croaked, his voice raw, cracked. After everything, after I gave you everything. Lorraine stood, her mask on, her tone sharp as broken glass. You're a fool, Frank. You've been a fool since the day I met you. Do you really think I married you for love? You were a paycheck, a stepping stone, and now you're old, weak, pathetic. It's time you were managed. The words hit him like blows. He staggered back into his chair, clutching the armrest as though it could hold him together. Brent rose from the sofa, trying to take control, his voice booming. This is nonsense. She's twisting everything. You're all falling for Harper's game. But no one was listening to him. All eyes were on Lorraine. The queen had revealed her fangs, and her kingdom was collapsing. Aunt Martha, one of the few relatives still foolish enough to adore Lorraine, shook her head, muttering, I can't believe this. Believe it, I said, my voice low but steady. My hands were shaking, but I clenched them into fists at my sides. She was going to drain him dry, and she's been draining him for years. Look at the documents. Look at the accounts. This is who she is. Lorraine's face twisted, her eyes blazing as she jabbed a finger at me. You think you've won, don't you? You think parading your little evidence around makes you powerful? You're still nothing, Harper. You're still that unwanted girl nobody wanted. And you always will be. My father finally spoke again, but this time it was a roar. Enough! His voice shook the walls. I stood by you. I trusted you. And this is how you repay me. Lorraine tried to recover, her tone softening. Frank, darling, you know I was upset. I didn't mean. Save it. His voice broke. He sank back down, staring at the floor like he was staring into a grave. The room erupted. Voices collided, everyone shouting at once. Janelle was crying. Brent was pacing like a caged animal. The relatives were whispering, gasping, taking sides. The perfect Christmas tableau Lorraine had built shattered into chaos. And in the middle of it all, I stood calm. I let them scream. I let them choke on the truth that had been there all along. Lorraine's empire was crumbling, and for the first time in years, I wasn't the one left broken. I bent down, picked up the recorder, and clicked it off. The silence it left behind was deafening. Then I looked straight at Lorraine, who was still trembling with fury, and I smiled. This, I said, my voice sharp as a blade, is just the beginning. The church bells rang out that Christmas morning, crisp and hollow in the cold air, their echoes stretching across the sleepy town. I remember standing outside the double doors, clutching the strap of my leather bag so tightly my knuckles ached. My breath puffed white in the frosty air, but the heat rising inside me made me sweat under my coat. This was it, the moment I'd been crawling toward through nights of doubt and fear. I wasn't here to pray. I wasn't here to forgive. I was here to burn Lorraine's empire to ash. Inside, the sanctuary glowed with garlands, candles, and poinsettias lining the altar. The organ hummed a soft prelude as people filed in, their laughter and greetings blending into a warm chorus. Children in itchy sweaters tugged at candy canes. Old men shook hands. Women leaned in to share gossip. And in the front row, perfectly placed like royalty, sat Lorraine. Her hair was lacquered into flawless waves, her pearl necklace glinting under the lights. She clutched my father's arm as if he were her prized accessory, not a man. Brent sat on her other side, chewing gum and scrolling his phone, while Janelle preened, smoothing her red velvet dress as though the whole congregation had gathered just to admire her. My heart beat hard enough to rattle my ribs. For years, Lorraine had owned this room. Every smile, every handshake, every whispered compliment was a coin in the kingdom she'd built on lies. And every one of them had believed her. Not today. I slipped into the back pew, my bag heavy on my lap. My fingers brushed over the folders inside. Bank statements, notarized documents, copies of retirement account withdrawals, recordings of Lorraine's voice dripping with arrogance. My weapons, my proof. The pastor began the service, his voice warm, his words familiar, but they barely registered. All I could hear was the pounding of blood in my ears. I watched Lorraine tilt her head, smiling with false humility as the pastor praised family unity and faith. She looked around the room like a queen addressing her loyal subjects. Then came the moment I knew she'd take. "Does anyone have an announcement or testimony before we continue?" the pastor asked. Lorraine rose slowly, her heels clicking against the hardwood as she stepped forward. She folded her hands in front of her like a saint, her face glowing with piety. "I'd like to share," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "This year has been full of trials, as we all know. But through faith, my family has grown stronger. We've learned to forgive, to love, to rise above the bitterness that tries to tear us apart." She paused, scanning the congregation, letting her words sink in. Then, with a delicate sigh, she added, Of course, not everyone appreciates family the way they should. Some people choose selfishness, dishonesty, and resentment. But today, I choose to forgive them. And there it was, her dagger, slipped neatly between my ribs under the cover of righteousness. The congregation turned toward me. Whispers slithered down the pews. Eyes pricked into my skin. I kept my chin high, but inside my lungs felt like they were collapsing. She was painting me as the villain again, as the ungrateful stepdaughter too bitter to know love. My father sat frozen beside her, his head lowered, refusing to meet my eyes. Enough. I rose from my seat. The whispers sharpened into a collective gasp. My legs trembled, but my voice didn't crack when I said, "Since you brought it up, Lorraine, maybe the whole church should know the truth about the woman they've been admiring all these years." The sanctuary fell silent. All eyes locked on me as I walked slowly down the aisle, the bag heavy on my shoulder, each step echoing against the hardwood floor. Lorraine's smile flickered for the first time, her eyes narrowing. My father shifted uncomfortably, gripping his knees. I reached the front, stood just a few feet from her, and pulled out the papers. "This," I said clearly, raising them high, "is evidence that Lorraine has been stealing from my father's retirement fund. Not once, not twice, dozens of times. Thousands of dollars. Disappeared." Gasps erupted like a fire. Heads turned, whispers flew. People shifted in their pews. Lorraine's mask cracked, but only for a heartbeat. She forced a laugh, though it rang hollow. "This is nonsense. Fabrications. Lies spun by a bitter girl who can't accept her father's happiness." I felt my mouth curl into a cold smile. Funny, because the bank doesn't think they're lies. Neither does the estate lawyer. Every transaction is documented. I slammed the papers onto the front pew, letting them scatter across the wood. The pastor tried to restore order, but the room was buzzing now, people leaning to one another, murmuring, shaking their heads. I wasn't finished. I reached into my bag again and pulled out my phone. "And if you still think I'm making this up, maybe you should hear what Lorraine says when she thinks no one's listening." I pressed play. Her voice filled the sanctuary, projected loud and clear. There was no mistaking it. Lorraine bragging about siphoning money, mocking my father, laughing at the family's ignorance. He'll never notice the fool. And by the time he does, I'll have moved everything into my name. Imagine the look on their faces when I finally own it all. The words hung in the air like poison gas. The congregation exploded. Shouts, cries, muttered prayers. A woman Lorraine often gossiped with stood and stormed out, shaking her head in disgust. A man from the deacon board turned to another and whispered harshly, his eyes fixed on Lorraine. Her closest allies, people she'd charmed and manipulated for years, were peeling away from her, like leaves falling from a tree in winter. Brent shot to his feet, his face blotchy red. "This is crap," he yelled, his voice cracking. "She made that up. She's framing Mom." "No one framed me," Lorraine snapped at him, her voice trembling with fury. Brent slammed his fist into the pew, rattling the hymnals, then shoved past people and stormed out, slamming the doors so hard the stained glass rattled. Lorraine's smile was gone now, stripped bare. She turned on me, her eyes blazing with venom. "You think this will save you, Harper? You think anyone will take your side after all your lies? You'll regret this." But her words were drowned in the chaos. People shouting, demanding explanations, my father burying his face in his hands. The kingdom she built on charm and deception was collapsing around her, and for the first time, she couldn't control the narrative. I stood tall, watching it crumble. And then, faint at first, then undeniable, I heard it. Police sirens. They cut through the noise of the church, growing louder, closer, wailing their way down the street. Heads turned. Whispers rose again, the tension spiking into panic. I gripped my bag tighter, my pulse racing. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. The sirens outside the church, still echoed in my chest long after the officers pushed through the double doors. They didn't rush, didn't shout, just walked with a steady authority that made the entire congregation shrink into silence. Lorraine, for once, was speechless. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, her pearl necklace trembling against her throat. The officer with the clipboard stepped forward. Lorraine Whitfield. She tried to stand tall, but her hands betrayed her, clutching the pew so tight her knuckles whitened. "Yes," she croaked, her voice cracking. "You're under investigation for financial fraud and elder exploitation." His words cut the air like steel. "We'll need you to come with us for questioning." A wave of gasps rolled through the sanctuary. Someone muttered, "Lord, have mercy." Someone else whispered, "I knew something wasn't right about her." Lorraine glanced desperately at my father, but he couldn't even look at her. His head hung low, his shoulders slumped like the weight of the whole building pressed down on him. For the first time in my life, he looked small. Brent was gone. He had bolted the moment the sirens arrived, no doubt already scheming some way to cover himself. Janelle sat frozen in the pew. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks, her phone clutched in her hand as though a single text could erase the spectacle unraveling around her. The officers guided Lorraine toward the back, their firm hands on her arms. She twisted once, her eyes burning into me with a hatred so raw I could almost feel it scorching my skin. "This isn't over, Harper," she spat. But the words bounced hollow against the stained glass windows as they led her away. The doors slammed shut, and the silence that followed was suffocating. The pastor cleared his throat, his hands trembling over his Bible. Let us close in prayer." But no one bowed their heads. They were too busy staring at me, some with pity, some with awe, others with thinly veiled judgment. I could feel every gaze piercing into me, but I stood still, chin lifted, refusing to give Lorraine the satisfaction of seeing me break. When I finally turned and walked out of the church, the cold air hit me like freedom. The sirens had faded into the distance, leaving only the crunch of snow beneath my boots and the faint sound of car doors slamming as people hurried to leave, eager to spread the scandal. That was the day Lorraine's empire began to collapse. But the ruins left behind were mine to deal with. In the days that followed, the fallout was merciless. News spread fast in a town like ours. Lorraine's friends stopped returning her calls. Her business partners distanced themselves, scrambling to salvage their own reputations. Janelle, once the starlet of every social gathering, found herself uninvited, ignored, whispered about in hallways she used to dominate. And Brent, no one had seen him since Christmas morning. Rumor was he'd fled 2 counties over, trying to outrun debts and questions he couldn't answer. I should have felt triumphant, but the victory tasted like ashes in my mouth. Because every night, without fail, my father showed up at Maya's door. The first time he knocked softly, like a boy asking to be let in after curfew. I almost didn't answer, but Maya, bless her heart, pressed the door open and gave me a look that said, "This is your choice." He stood there on the porch, hat in his hands, eyes red-rimmed. He looked older than I had ever seen him. "Harper," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know how deep it went." I wanted to slam the door in his face. I wanted to scream that ignorance wasn't innocence. That every time Lorraine cut me down, humiliated me, stole from me, he was there. He saw it. He let it happen. But all I said was, "It doesn't matter now." He tried again the next night, and the next. Always the same words, the same desperate plea. "Forgive me. Please. I didn't mean to choose her over you." Each time, I listened in silence, then turned away. But inside I was unraveling. Because part of me still longed for the father who used to carry me on his shoulders at the county fair, who taught me to ride a bike, who sat through my school plays with pride in his eyes. That man was gone, replaced by someone too weak to stand up for me when it mattered most. And weakness, I realized, was just another form of betrayal. The lawyer's office was warm that January morning, the kind of cozy heat that fogged up the windows and made the smell of polished wood and old books settle heavy in the air. I sat across from Mr. Langley, the estate attorney who had first revealed my grandmother's trust. He laid the final set of documents in front of me, his eyes steady but sympathetic. "This will formalize it," he said. "Your inheritance, your control of the assets, everything. But you should know, it includes the clause about your father. You'll have to decide whether to keep him as a beneficiary or remove him entirely." I stared at the papers. The words blurred for a moment, swimming on the page. Remove him. 3 little words that carried the weight of a lifetime. I thought of Lorraine, smug and triumphant at every holiday dinner, whispering poison into his ear until he believed it was truth. I thought of the way he warned her about me, how he let her ambush me on Christmas Eve, how he sat silently while she tried to erase me from existence. And then I thought of his face on my porch, lined with regret, begging for forgiveness. My hand trembled as I picked up the pen. "This is the only way," I whispered to myself. And with one sharp stroke of ink, I signed his name out of my life. Mr. Langley nodded solemnly. "It's done." I closed the folder, my chest tight, but my spine straight. For the first time in years, I wasn't a pawn in someone else's game. I was in control. That night he came again. I almost didn't answer, but something in me needed closure. He stood there in the cold, snowflakes caught in his hair, his breath clouding in the dark. "Please," he said, his voice hoarse. "I know I failed you. I know I let her poison everything. But I'm still your father." I swallowed hard, my throat burning. "You had a choice," I said quietly, "and you chose her." His eyes glistened, his mouth opening as if to protest, but I didn't let him. I stepped forward, the cold biting my cheeks, and I said the words that had been burning inside me since the day Lorraine slithered into our lives. "Live with her." I closed the door before he could answer. The silence on the other side was deafening, but for the first time it was mine. The snow had already begun to melt by the time I moved into my grandmother's old house. For weeks I had passed it on long drives, always wondering what it would feel like to step through those doors and not as the forgotten girl, not as the daughter cast aside, but as the rightful heir. Now the keys sat heavy in my palm, warm from my grip, as if they carried the pulse of everyone who had ever lived here. The paint had been restored, the shutters fixed, the porch boards no longer sagged underfoot. The town called it the Whitfield home, but in my chest I whispered a correction every time. "It's mine now." Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and polish, like a space both new and familiar. The walls no longer carried Lorraine's sneer or Brent's laughter. For the first time in years, there was quiet, thick, honest quiet. I walked from room to room, my fingertips brushing along furniture that had once been covered in dust cloths, now brought back to life. I lingered longest in the study, where my grandmother's portrait hung. Her eyes, sharp and unflinching, seemed to follow me. "I did it," I whispered to her. I stood up. But even as I said it, a part of me wondered, had I gone too far? Because the fallout had not stopped with Lorraine. The town buzzed with gossip. Every conversation a fire stoked by what I'd done. Some praised me. Others called me cold, merciless. And my father, he had stopped knocking. Maybe out of shame, maybe out of final acceptance. Either way, the silence from him cut deeper than I cared to admit. At night, lying in the bed that once belonged to my grandmother, the ceiling seemed to press down with questions. Had I burned too much? Had I let revenge guide me past the line of justice? I'd ask myself those questions, and then, as if on cue, I'd remember Lorraine's smirk as she signed away my life. Brent's threats, Janelle's laughter, my father's silence. And I'd know I hadn't gone far enough. The morning the police van came for Lorraine, I didn't hide. I stood at the window, arms crossed, watching as the blue and red lights flickered across the snowy street. The neighbors had gathered, their breath puffing in the cold. their whispers louder than they thought. She fought them, of course. She twisted and shouted, her designer coat slipping off one shoulder, her manicured nails clawing at the air. "You can't do this to me. This is a mistake," she screamed, her voice breaking into something ugly and raw. But no one moved to help her. Not her friends. Not even Janelle, who had slipped into the background days ago, her eyes empty, her social world collapsing in slow motion. The officers pulled Lorraine toward the van, their grips firm, their patience long gone. For a second, she looked up at my window, her eyes locking on mine. Even then, even with her empire crumbling, she managed to summon hatred sharp enough to pierce glass. I didn't flinch. I didn't move, because I wanted her to see me. I wanted her to know it was me who had taken her down. The door of the van slammed shut, muffling her voice, and the engine rumbled to life. The crowd began to scatter, their chatter carrying on the wind, already shaping the legend of what had happened here. And I stood there, unmoving, watching until the sirens faded into nothing. Was it cruel? Maybe. Was it deserved? Absolutely. Now I'll ask you, do you think I went too far? Or did they deserve every second of it? Comment below, because I want to know if you would have done the same. Don't forget to subscribe for more revenge stories. As for me, I finally turned from the window, the house silent around me, the weight of years lifting inch by inch. This Christmas, I finally gave myself the only gift that mattered. Their silence,